Welcome to Connected Conversations for Creatives, a place where creatives like you can learn, grow, and connect. I'm your host, Jennifer Carr. Creativity isn't just about what we create, but how we see the world. It's shaped by our unique experiences, perceptions, and cognitive frameworks. But for those who navigate the world with maybe a neurodivergent mind, for example, within the autistic spectrum, creativity can manifest in extraordinarily profound ways. But despite their immense potential, autistic creatives often face significant barriers, misunderstandings, stereotypes, and a world largely designed for neurotypical norms. Why is it crucial then to debunk harmful stereotypes of autism? What makes autistic culture unique? And how can recognizing these differences enrich our collective creative output? Well, these questions are vital as we aim to foster environments where all creatives, regardless of neurological makeup, can thrive and share their truest voices. As we explore these themes, consider this. How can we, as part of the creative industries, adjust our practices to be more inclusive? What steps can we take to ensure that our projects, our workplaces, and our communities celebrate and amplify neurodiversity? How much richer could our collaborations be when we fully embrace diverse minds? Joining us today to explore these questions is Dr. Angela Lauria, a late-diagnosed autistic adult who has not only embraced her identity, but has also leveraged it to forge a significant path in the world of publishing. Through her company, Difference Press, she has helped almost 2,000 entrepreneurs write, publish, and promote their books, focusing significantly on lifting the voices of marginalized groups. Angela is a prolific author herself, with titles achieving recognition on prestigious lists like the Wall Street Journal and USA Today bestsellers lists. So, stay tuned as we delve into a conversation that promises not only to enlighten, but also to inspire as we learn from her journey, her insights, and her advocacy for a world where being different is not just accepted, but celebrated. So, Angela, thank you for being here and welcome to the show.
Jennifer, what a lovely and thoughtful setup. I'm so excited for this conversation.
I am too, and I'm very interested in getting to learn about your work and your goals. But first, let's talk about Angela before learning that you were autistic and how that shaped you for the work you're taking on now.
Yeah, I'm going to actually take you in the Wayback Machine.
Yeah.
So, I don't know if you remember that poem. I always saw it growing up. Children learn what they live.
Okay.
So, have you ever seen that? It's like, you can teach a kid, you can tell them things, but they're going to learn what they live or what they experience.
Yes.
And What I experienced growing up is my dad, when he was 12 years old, he fell in love with hot rods, and he started shining shoes on the steps of St. Mary's Church in New Haven, Connecticut for 25 cents a pair, and saved up all those quarters. And when he was 16, he bought a car. He started a business. He barely graduated from high school, but he graduated, and he is today in the Hot Rod Hall of Fame. So I grew up, no one told me this, but I grew up just assuming when you were about 12 years old, you'd find the thing you loved most in the world, and then you would make a great living doing the thing you loved. I mean, I'd heard people say, if you do what you love, you'll never work a day in your life. And I just thought that's what everyone did. So when I was 13, I wrote my first novel, and I still have it. And by the time, this is a guilty confession, but by the time I was 20, I paid my way through college. I had scholarships. I went to school for writing and paid my way through college writing term papers for people. Yeah, it was $10 a page. If you need one, call me up. And I just thought that's what everyone was doing. I figured everyone in college they all had their own things, whatever their things were, and they were doing that. So my senior year, one of my professors got me a job for a New York Times bestselling author, an investigative journalist. I'm on the nonfiction side and have been since then. So I was doing work with New York Times authors, Washington Post journalists, investigative reporters. I did, all my early books were on espionage. Go figure. So that was fun, and political memoirs and things like that. And my whole career, it didn't matter where I went or what I did. I would always find someone. I was a ghostwriter exclusively for 17 years. And craziest places. I was on the tube in London going to a concert, met a guy, hired me to be a ghostwriter. I was touring Uluru in the middle of Australia, the big red rock in the middle of Australia, met a guy from Philadelphia who was like a financial advisor, hired me to ghostwrite a book on investing in Hong Kong. It didn't matter where I went. I met people and I would get hired. I never had a website. I had business cards that said like writer, editor. It was like Angela Lauria, writer, editor. That was it. And then I would just hand out, and they were like, they look like green marble. I got them. They were like Avery labels. I got it, Staples or something, and printed them my own self. That was it. That was my whole business plan.
Wow.
And it's literally before I was diagnosed what I thought everyone in the world was doing. And I was always very successful as a writer. And I don't know, I never really gave it a second thought. What I have since learned is that both my father and I, because autism is hereditary, both my father and I are autistic, and my passion for writing and my dad's passion for cars is what in the world of autism is known as a special interest, which comes from our monotropic focus. Mono meaning single, meaning you could like drill down, go really deep. So I have a very particular specialty as a writer, which is that I deconstructed 1,000 books and created a system for quickly extracting the information needed to figure out how a book needs to be written. And I can write it in pieces. I write it out of order, and then I can put it together really quickly. I'm super easy to edit. And I just identify where do I need to do research. That's a lot of my journalism training, but where do I need to do research? And I fill those blanks in later. So I write the whole book, and then I know exactly what I need to go find, what information or what data. And it's very bottom-up processing, which again is very common for hyper-connected autistic brains. We process 42% more information on average than a typical brain. And so I was doing that and I was very successful, but I didn't know it. So when I got diagnosed, the biggest shift that happened is my career had always been a place where I had thrived, but my relationships were really difficult. And one of the reasons they were difficult is one, monotropic focus. If I'm doing something, I'm doing it obsessively. And the people around me are like, why are you talking about the same thing? Why are you playing the same song over and over again? Why won't you get up from the computer? When I write a book, and I did this for my PhD dissertation too, I will literally just spend 6 weeks doing nothing but writing. I barely change my clothes. I barely eat. I'm just doing the book, and then the book is done, and then I do other things. So it put a strain, and the other strain comes from the bottom up processing piece, which is when I'm having a conversation, I'm looking at all the little points of data or the trees, whereas the person I'm talking to, my boss or a client or a boyfriend or something like that, they're looking at the big picture. And they're like, these are a lot of details, and I don't see how they're related to my request right now, which is that you do something. So when I was able to put together that piece of, this is why I've been so successful as a ghostwriter and an editor, and this is why I've been so disastrous in my relationships, I was able to make a bunch of corrections, is part of what I did, and then also surround myself with other autistic people and neurodivergent people where that double empathy problem, that like mismatch of communication styles is much less of an issue. And so I now work almost exclusively with autistic, ADHD, and dyslexic authors on getting their books done, both as a writer and editor and publishing services provider.
That is fantastic. So let me ask you, was there a moment where you said, I should go talk to somebody and see what the reason is? Like, what was that pivotal moment?
Yeah, it was an author. It was an author. I was listening to, it was a radio show, but it's now a very popular podcast called This American Life. And there was a guy on This American Life who had written a book. His name is Dave Finch, and he had written a book called The Journal of Best Practices. And I just thought it was a delightful interview. And so I got the book. And I have to tell you, I've probably bought 100 books from This American Life. They bring an author on. I'm a sucker. I'm on the roadside, just like dialing for dollars. So I bought the book, and there was a specific story in the book where Dave is the author, and he wanted to rent a car. And so he researched what are the best cars to rent. And he had identified it was a Toyota Camry or whatever it was. I think it was a Toyota Camry. And so he never rented a car before. He wanted to get the best car. He did all the research. He made a spreadsheet. This is what I do to make every decision. Who doesn't? How else would you make a decision? And then he called up the car rental company. He's like, I would like to rent a Toyota Camry. I hear they're the best. And they're like, oh, it doesn't work that way. We just put a standard size car and we're going to give you whatever car is there. And he's like, yes, I understand. I'm happy to pay more. I would like a Toyota Camry. And they're like, cars come in and out. We can't like hold a car for you for a week. It doesn't work that way. And he's like, I am asking you for a Toyota Camry, and has what we call in the autistic world a complete autistic meltdown. Mm-hmm. He cannot function for the rest of the day. Mm-hmm. And I read this story and I'm like, well, how else do other people do it? There are options. What? Everything about that, that's how I did everything. I would figure out the way. And then if it wasn't my way, I would have a complete and utter meltdown and I would destroy relationships and there'd be a firestorm behind me. And I was like, oh my God. So there was a quiz he mentions in the book. And now there are a lot of online diagnostics. So there's this quiz he mentions in the book. And I go take the quiz and I scored very high. It was like, you are likely, at the time, the word was Asperger's. So you likely have Asperger's. But I took that quiz and I was like, anyone would score likely to have Asperger's. So I asked my best friend, I was like, could you take this quiz too? Because this is crazy. They're just trying to tell everyone they have Asperger's. Mm-hmm. So ask me. So I had her take it. I got an 86 out of 100. She got a 5.
Yeah.
And I was like, wait, you don't do this? What about this question? What did you answer for this? What could you have possibly answered? I don't understand what you could have answered. And that was when I sort of figured it out and made an appointment and eventually got diagnosed. That was in September of 2012. And here's a funny thing, because I think, are you also a life coach?
Marriage and family counselor, also life coach. Yes.
Yeah. So I love this author, Martha Beck. She's a beautiful memoir writer. She wrote a book called Leaving the Saints, which was about leaving the Mormon faith, and is beautifully written. Her father was like very high up in the church, so it was very painful to leave, and big family, lots of kids. And anyway, very nuanced, beautiful writer. So I had gone to a writing retreat with her, and everyone there was a life coach. I didn't even know what life coaching was, but a lot of life coaches started hiring for me to help them with their books. And I ended up getting certified as a life coach. And I was on my way to that event when I was reading this book. I had heard, earlier that week, I had heard This American Life. I bought the book and it was my book for the plane. So I'm reading this, and I ended up having a huge misunderstanding at this event and got kicked out of this group of lovely life coaches who their whole message was like, everyone is perfect just as you are, except for me. So what I had done, and this was 2012, is I, for a lot of my authors, I would go to events and I would live tweet. It was a whole thing. I would like live tweet American Idol at the time. I don't know. But you would just like comment. I think at Scandal, I would live tweet the TV show Scandal. And so there were very personal things on the stage. Like someone might be talking about cheating on their spouse. I was not, Jennifer Carr cheated on her spouse. I was not live tweeting that. Yeah, exactly. But there were cute quotes. Like at one point, Martha Beck was talking about gelato, and she was saying, who doesn't love gelato? That was one of the things I tweeted. There was no social media policy. It was 2012.
Yeah.
And in my opinion, I was like, someone's going to read this. They're going to see how brilliant Martha Beck is. They're going to sign up for your coaching. Like, this is great. Who wouldn't want someone on social media promoting their events, but nobody there knew what social media was. And I got like kicked out of the event. They took my life coach certification away. They said I violated the circle of trust. And I kept providing facts and data and details. I pulled out the contract. I went line by line through the contract. Nothing said circle of trust. Nothing said what you had to do to violate it. I pulled out their rules were transparent, authentic, and open. I wrote definitions. I created a slideshow. These are all very autistic things to do.
Yeah.
And that's what I mean by the forest and the trees, right? Like I was, and they're just like, look, it just doesn't feel good. We don't have reasons. We don't have facts to support it. We are top-down processors. We just know this is fucking creepy. Oh, this is very creepy. Some lady is talking about us on the internet and nobody consented to that. And it was 2012, right? They didn't know what it was.
Yeah.
So it was a complete, that's what we call the double empathy problem, where I was looking at it from bottom up. They were looking at it from top down. They didn't get me. I didn't get them. And that was happening right as I was diagnosed. So I was seeing that in the book, or right as I was self-identifying. Mm-hmm. And I was like, I will get diagnosed and then I will get the medicine. Give me the pill that makes this thing go away so people like me. That was the next awakening. The pill has been a very long journey. It's been 12 years now. I learn more and more each day. It's made me a better writer, and I think it's made me a better business person in that I know how to regulate my emotions more. My business had gotten really big, and I was able to scale it down to something that matches my neurology and the pace that works for me, and set things up so I can take more frequent breaks during the day. I actually still write. When I write a book, I'll spend 6 weeks really locked down writing a book. That does work for me. But that plus managing 40 employees did not.
Yeah.
So I've gotten to know myself a lot better in the last 12 years. I'm a much better wife. So
I think a lot of times when you do get to understand yourself, even if there's not a label or a diagnosis attached to it, getting to know yourself will make you a much better person in general. Because if you don't understand you, don't expect other people to understand you either,
Yeah. And I will say that's one of my biggest messages is the journey of being neurodivergent. There are all these tools to help you get to know yourself, because newsflash, there is no magic pill. Right. Even for ADHD, even though there is medication for ADHD, it's not the answer. The answer is the personal work. That personal work benefits everyone.
Yes.
So I don't care if people self-identify, don't identify, hate labels, are diagnosed or not diagnosed, think autism should be cured, think it shouldn't be cured. Like, those are all great conversations, but what I care about is, can you improve your life, your happiness, your writing, your creativity? I'm so much more creative now. I know what it takes to get into a state of flow. So Csikszentmihalyi talks about flow state. Mm-hmm. He most certainly was part of the neurodivergent family. And what he was identifying is much easier. It's monotropic focus, and it's much easier for neurodivergent people. Now that I know what it is, I know how to create the environment to make that happen.
I love that. Did you struggle with embracing the label, or was it kind of a sense of freedom and relief when you were like, oh, that makes so much more sense?
There has been a big change with the DSM. So I was diagnosed as Asperger's and immediately loved the term Aspie. It felt like I found a family. I was like, I'm Aspie. I could pick out the piece. Steve Jobs is Aspie. I'm like these people. Steve Martin. I'm like these people. And then, you might even know better than I do, 2015 or so, they changed the DSM to group everything under the title of autism. And there's a lot of good reasons for that. And it's correct. And by the way, I think ADHD should be as well. I don't think they're separate. I actually think it all has to do with the same brain process.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm autistic. like autistics are 7-year-old boys hitting their head against a headboard.
Right.
Like, that took me a long time. Like, I did not get why. Can I just still be? So I had a Twitter profile, which was the Sassy Aspie or sassyaspie.com. I did not want to give, I own the domain. Like, I did not want to give that up. And that was a journey. And that actually was the most healing part of my journey, actually. Because again, it just required a deeper level of reflection. And by the way, if people choose to keep using the word Asperger's or Aspie, I don't care. Everyone should do whatever they want. I don't need to. I got enough problems. This is all I can handle. But I certainly understand the argument. And for me, I have embraced the term, not just I have autism, but I am autistic.
Yes. And there is a delineation there, and you do kind of have to come to the acceptance of both, because one of them you will try to fight, right? One of them you're going to be like, that's not me, that's not me. But then once you're like, I am, oh yeah, that's a whole different conversation.
Yeah, it really is. And I think it's a conversation that for me, it's why I wanted to start with that story about my dad and my autistic heritage. I don't have it here. We're on video and I wish I had it here, but growing up, my grandmother had a 3rd grade education, super poor family. Lots of her siblings died of tuberculosis in sanatoriums, like terrible upbringing. She was completely illiterate, signed her name with an X. But when I would go to her house, one of the games we would play is my grandmother had cut glass, and we would play the museum game, where we would take out all her glass and we would arrange it by type. And then we would explain the glass and who the manufacturer was and what the style was and what period it came from. There was no internet.
Yeah.
My grandmother could not read. She had an encyclopedic knowledge of cut glass.
Wow.
And I'm like, so, and I know what she did because I was with her. She would go to antique stores and she would talk to the antique shop owners and memorize everything, who the manufacturers were, what country they were in, what the process was, how much everything sold for. It was like Antiques Roadshow. And then she had these beautiful display cases, and that's a huge part of autistic culture. We have to display our collections. And so we played museum, which I thought is what everyone else is. Everyone else was playing with their grandmother with cut glass when you were 4. And such an autistic hobby. Like, what a beautiful autistic family tradition that we've had through these generations. And like, I'm so proud of that now, and I lead with that. And that wasn't true when I was identifying as Asperger's. I didn't really understand that it was hereditary. I thought I had a thing that was broken and I could rise above it with grit and determination. And now I'm like, oh, I have different synaptical pruning because of a genetic mutation that was passed down from my grandmother to my father and before that. That's all it is.
That's beautiful. Like, I love that, because it could be so disheartening to say, especially because other people on the outside don't understand, right? You know, they're like, oh, like you said, it's that 7-year-old boy that you're like, will you please sit down and stop? You know, will you please just leave me alone and
leave me in the train.
You know, and so to embrace it and to just come to that knowledge and realization, like how much more special your family memories are. I'm going to tear up thinking about it. It's so wonderful.
I mean, I knew my grandmother couldn't read or write, and I knew my grandmother had an encyclopedic knowledge of not just cut glass. She had a few hobbies where she had that kind of knowledge. And it never occurred to me, how does one get that knowledge?
Yeah.
If you can't read or write, like, there's no internet. You can't look it up. Wow.
That's amazing.
What capacity? Like, imagine if she did have an education. Like, gosh. So, wow. Yeah, and that's monotropic focus. So, when we find something we love, no one can do deeper dives than us. We have such hunger for information that it will stick. And by the way, ask us how to boil an egg, and you know, not usually super successful. If it's not our thing, it's not our thing. Oh, my dad growing up really thought people who had to eat were weak. So my dad would eat once a day at 6:20. And it had to be a piece of meat, a green vegetable, and a potato. And they couldn't touch. And it had to be at the exact same time and presented in the exact way. And people who had, first of all, people who had breakfast, I mean, heathens, but people who had just stopped their workday when they were in the middle of something to eat lunch, he just had so much disdain for. And I was always so embarrassed because, like, I needed to eat lunch, like I would have lunch and I was like, oh, I'm so weak. I'm so tired. Now understanding autism, I'm like, oh, well, that is very typical eating patterns in autistic culture. Like very specific time, very specific food. He definitely had safe foods.
Yeah.
And I was labeled as picky because my safe foods were different than his. But he had safe foods. He was just the person with the money.
Yes. Oh my gosh. And I'm not going to spill all of my kids' story because that's her story to tell one day. But, from the time she was little, like she had tendencies that made us go, that's different. Oh, that's cute. That's special. Like the obsessions and like the deep dives, even at like 3, like she would have these just, I don't know. It was wild. Like she's laser focused on whatever she was into at the time. And she, lining things up exactly so that they would just, and by colors.
That's the museum. We have to look at that. Look
exactly.
at how older is slightly different height.
Yes. And so it was always stuff like that. And so, and I always wondered, right? And we still have not officially put a label on anything, only because I want her to be able to come to that realization herself. If it's something that she struggles with, whatever, we monitor, right? I'm on the outside looking in, but it was we only eat mac and cheese for 6 months. We only eat chicken nuggets for the next 6 months, like, and nothing else. You know what I'm saying?
This is the way.
there are tendencies. And so as a parent, I'm on the outside looking in and I'm going, okay, this is something that I want to empower her. I want her to be able to one day have a voice if she feels that she needs it. Now, granted, she attracts all the same. We call them her little weirdies because they all have, I don't know, their brains are just so beautiful and wonderful and exciting and special. And I'm just like, your little weirdies are here.
That's double empathy.
Yes.
So we just get each other.
Yes, and y'all find each other. It's like it's a beacon, and you just know where to find each other.
We got a little beacon. It's true,
and I love it. And so, as a parent, what are things that you wish you would have had growing up? To say, how can I support this going forward?
Well, that's where I will say diagnosis can be helpful, only because it's easier to get an IEP or a 504 plan, like. You do sometimes need supports in school. My best teachers did a thing that is on the one hand terrible, but also great. So I had multiple teachers who found me so irritating in class that they would put me in the hallway. So most of my school was done in the hallway. And I know this sounds terrible, but what they were doing is actually, in a way, what I would have wanted without the stigma of I'm the bad kid who's always in the hallway. So they customized a curriculum for me based on my special interests, which sometimes was at grade level, above grade level, below grade level. I remember in 6th grade, I was reading like War and Peace, but then in math, I was not. So I have a little dyscalculia. So, but they would, by force, customize a curriculum for me and put me in the hallway. And the hallways during class, not between classes, but during class, they were quieter. There were fewer distractions. I could focus on my own work without worrying about who was laughing at me or calling me names or any of that. So I actually liked those teachers the best. The other teachers would keep me in the class and like yell at me and make fun of me like the other kids, or give the other kids permission to make fun of me for being difficult. I would have meltdowns. I would embarrass myself more. I never had meltdowns in the hallway. I was just like doing my thing. So accommodations are really important, and knowing, and I do think the IEP process is good for this because you meet every year with your teachers, that individualized education. By the way, I think everybody should have an IEP, not just kids.
Yes.
I do an IEP for me every year because I change. Like I'm going through menopause now. My support needs are totally different. There are different things going on in my life that cause different support needs, and I will modify my personal individualized education plan. So I think having I wish I had quieter spaces to do my work. I wish I was allowed to wear earphones. I don't even know if we had earphones then. I now wear loop engage earplugs whenever, like switching classes, that would have made a huge difference because I came into every class dysregulated. So knowing what a meltdown is, and if I was getting close to a meltdown, having support in getting out of the classroom. Hall passes, it was so hard to get permission to go to the bathroom. But if you read the biographies or the memoirs of like Fern Brady or who's a Scottish comedian, or Hannah Gatsby, who's an Australian comedian, both of whom are autistic, and they talk about how going to the bathroom saved their life because they were right on the edge of an autistic meltdown or had one and needed to re-regulate. I wish I knew what emotional regulation felt like. I only knew what it felt to be dysregulated. I was dysregulated all day, every day for all of school. And there were moments where I wasn't. And that was usually for me when I was writing. So when the teacher would say, I think other kids hated this, the teacher would say, I'm going to give you, I remember Miss Miller, at the beginning of every class, she would give us a prompt. Like, my favorite smell in the spring is... And then every class started with 15 minutes of free writing based on her prompt. And I would be like completely regulated by the time class started. Like switch classes, 15 minutes of writing. If I could do that at the beginning of every class, that would have been huge for me. So
seriously. No, I love that. I think parents really do need to be able to help their kids lean into who they are and teach them. The regulation is huge. Like because I did not understand that to save my life. Like I did not, like moving.
I have a little stimmy toy. I would have gotten kicked out of class for this. And this could have saved me so many hours of tears if I could just have a little stimmy toy, a little something to hold.
Yes, because we homeschool. We have homeschooled the entire time. She's finishing up her 9th grade year. It's been fantastic, but it took us a good 2 years for me to understand that she has to be doing something while she's listening. And I didn't understand that because I went to public school, right? You sat there and you listened. You didn't do anything else because it was rude if you did. And so we had to get through. It was finally at the end of 1st grade. I was like, have some Legos while I'm talking. And she could tell me word for word what I said if she was doing anything else.
Of course, I can listen so much better if I don't have to look you in the eye. How do you think I'm processing? It makes so much sense when you get it. Now, that said, I do think the way, and like, God bless teachers, the way we have set up schools, it is it's very difficult to get the accommodations I would have needed to thrive. It could have been better, but to truly thrive, I really feel like I love micro schools, but I feel like homeschooling or micro schools really, it's the only way to have the real accommodations your kid needs. Now, obviously, that's such a privilege, and not everybody
I agree.
can do that. And my mom wouldn't have been able to. I was super lucky with I have a neurodivergent son, and I sent him to a school called Fusion, which was amazing. It's so every other class, all your core classes are one-on-one, but with a teacher. And then every other class, you do the homework from the class before. So you have English class, and then you have an hour to do that homework in a group that's also led by a teacher. And they had clubs and activities and sports, but all of their actual academic classes were one-on-one. And it was like, it was in an office building, and all the teachers had like if you walked into your boss's office or picture a character sitting at their desk, The teachers had desks, the kids would pull up a chair on the other side, and it was like having a meeting with your boss. And the biggest thing they taught was self-advocacy and emotional regulation.
Yep.
So that was the best of both worlds for us, but it's very hard in the current system for anyone. I mean, I think I'm most worried about the teachers. I don't know how they do it. It's a terrible idea.
Yeah, I don't know either. Well, and I kind of turned the conversation towards a whole different ballgame, but let's go back to talking about your work, because self-advocacy and advocating for others who are in this neurodivergent world, like your work focuses on amplifying those voices. So how do you ensure that these voices are represented in the books that you author and help others author?
Yeah, well, I think it's exactly what I was saying about being able to send your kid to a school like Fusion or being able to homeschool. Everybody needs help. It's just the more power you have and the more like economic means you have, the more publicly acceptable you are, the more that you can make the accommodations you need to, let's say, get your book done. So if you are neurodivergent in more of an attention deficit way or an attention difference way, it might be hard to finish your project. You might be great at starting book projects. Mm-hmm. You're probably amazing at seeing the project, but actually having the executive functioning skills to finish it, you're going to need what's often called body doubling, or what might be called having a personal assistant. Like, right?
Yes.
So we know CEOs. I'm actually personal friends with Richard Branson, who is very out about having an ADHD mind. And he talks about, and being dyslexic and not being able to read or write, and how important from day one, when he was 17 and starting Virgin Music, he started a music newspaper, his personal assistants were. Well, not everybody knows how to find or manage or can afford a personal assistant, like all of those things. So on the autistic side of the neurodivergent spectrum, we have so much process complexity. If we want to write a book about coffee cups, there is like, this could be an 800,000 page book. There is so much that you want to talk about: how the paper's made, where it's made, the economic challenges of the paper. Do you want to talk about branding, color, dyeing, Nepal, children who don't have clean water supply? Like, there are so many places we can go.
Yes.
That on that side, finishing it is usually not the problem for an autistic person. For them, a lot of times they struggle with actually starting it, narrowing the scope, and not making it a 50,000 page book. Yeah. So, and there are different supports as well. There's like a lot of stuff that comes up with my dyslexic clients. And so one of the ways that I focus on making publishing more accessible to neurodivergent people is identifying what's their IEP, where do they need those supports, and how can we build them into the process at any price point. So I have VIP clients that'll pay me 50 grand. We'll do everything. It's white glove. But I also do tons of free trainings, and I have my book, which is here. Which way do I point? The Equalizing Quill. I'm like, there it is, The Equalizing Quill, which talks about a different way than I think people are talking about AI, which is as an accessibility accommodation for neurodivergent people. So in a perfect world, you hire me for my fancy pants white glove service, like sending my kid to Fusion or whatever. But not everybody can do that. But there are ways now that AI makes these things more accessible and absolutely free. But you have to know what accommodations you need. So like my sister has a neurodivergent son. She was going in for their IEP meeting. She's like, what accommodations do I ask for? I'm like, Brady needs to eat lunch alone. He needs to go eat lunch in the nurses. He will never eat. Like, there's no way. He has so much executive functioning around that, plus sensory sensitivities. He probably needs you to bring lunch in because he's got 2 or 3 safe foods and they need to be refrigerated. So you need to set up a thing with it. That is so customized because I know Brady and I know my sister and I know how long the drive is. You have to know so much to ask for accommodation. So in my free trainings and in this book, I'm telling you, these are the kind of accommodations you probably need that AI can provide. Here's how to go get them. And I will tell you off the bat, as an author, none of these include write this book for me. It won't be good anyway. It's not about having AI write your book.
Yeah.
Whoever is telling you that, whoever's selling 1,500 ChatGPT prompts to write a book, write your book in 4 minutes. That is not for you. That is not a good book. That is not how we're using AI. It's really about creating either on the autistic side of things, the focus and mapping out 4 or 5 or 6 or 12 different books from your coffee cup idea, or from the executive functioning, project management, scheduling tasks, breaking down tasks, and even asking ChatGPT to body W. So you can open up this is just like one really quick tip. You can open up a chat session, call it chapter 1, and you can tell ChatGPT, I'm going to be writing chapter 1. As I write, I'm going to upload paragraphs, and I want you to tell me good job and what I should do next. Here's my writing plan. Here's where I want to finish. And you can have for free a coach holding your hand and body doubling you that will feel, I think it's better if I'm sitting next to you, which is how I help my ADHDers. But here's a way to get very close to that for free right now. So,
yes. Oh, that's fantastic advice, because I use with my little version of ADHD that I have mastered over the years. ChatGPT is my friend, because I have to edit all of my podcasts. I asked it, hey, I have to have my podcast edited this many days before, And so I was like, I sent my list in, and it said, by this day, edit this podcast, and then email your person by this date, because I have to have that plan in front of me.
Yeah, that's process complexity. And otherwise, because you're so creative, you'll be like, this will be amazing. Right. But how?
How?
But how, my friend? How?
Yes. And so I love that.
Example of how to use it. And I mean, look, if you ever said to ChatGPT, I'm doing an interview with somebody who is a botanist, what are good questions to ask botanists? Great. Get a list of 20 questions. You'll end up editing it, but you might pick 1 or 2 from there. That's great. Having ChatGPT write me a script for a podcast and then you just reading it, not great. Not what it's
great. No, if you need to practice maybe recording yourself reading it, whatever. But yeah, no, it takes that human element out. And so don't make that your only tool, but it is a fantastic tool, and it's free. So yeah, I love ChatGPT. Like so many people are anti and against this AI thing. And I'm like, I'll be your friend. I will say please and thank you to my AI, and just let's be friends.
Well, it's funny because that's what I was going to ask you about as an author.
Mm-hmm.
I am in I know you write mostly fiction.
It's all fiction, yeah.
And wow, there are a lot of fiction authors who are real angry about AI. I'm in a lot of groups where I try and say things like this, like, I'm not using it to write my book, but I use it. Of course I use it. It's an incredible tool. Would you not use a calculator? And I'm trying to divide 100 by 4. I use a calculator. What are you talking about? Like,
because I have to verify, but no, I love it. And I will. Like, I was telling my husband the other day, I was writing something and I was like, what would this sound like if a 25-year-old guy said it? And he's like, I don't know, I haven't been 25 in so long. So I said, hey, ChatGPT, how would this sound if a 25-year-old American white guy said da-da-da? And they were like, oh, and they changed it. And I was like, okay, let's make him 27, because that sounds a little like Surfer Boy. And so, but those are things that I do use, because I would never been a guy, much less a 25-year-old guy. So I was like, I don't know. And I don't have one in my back pocket. So let's ask.
That's such a great use. I never thought of that because I don't really do dialogue, but yeah. I mean, I love the idea of just playing with that. We do this for genre. So I'll have somebody come up with an idea for their book, and then I get basically a book cover description, a book description. If it was investigative journalism, like my coffee cup idea, if it was how to, and if it was memoir. And then we play around with those 3 different descriptions to kind of help hone in on, I'm like, these are completely different outlines. We don't have to use any of these outlines, but once I get the description, I'll be like, what could a possible outline look like if we were doing that book?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And it, especially for my autistic clients, they're like, they can see it now.
Yes.
Especially those of us with aphantasia, and we have trouble like picturing what is it. I'm like, okay, here are 3 books. We're not writing any of these, but now you can feel, do you want to write more like a how-to? Do you want to write more self-help? Do you want to write more memoir? Do we want to do more like creative nonfiction? And you could see the same topic, how it would be done different ways. But I've never done it with dialogue. I love that.
It's fun. You can have conversations with yourself at that point. It gets a little weird.
You could or take a chapter or a section of dialogue and look at if you had like the character as 3 or 4, like what if it was a nurse instead of a doctor?
Yeah.
What if it was her mom instead of her sister? And see that scene multiple ways. You're not going to use that exact language, but you're like, oh, wow, I can see how this character would change the interaction.
Okay, I did something very similar in the book that I have coming out in October. The main male character grows up on a peanut farm in Georgia. Well, I live in the South. I've driven by plenty of peanut farms. I've never worked on one. We have a farm. We have a tractor. I don't know the names of all the implements. I needed to know if he was out in the peanut field on a tractor, what part would break on that tractor? And so I asked ChatGPT, I'm like, hey, help me figure out what would be happening in this scene when the tractor breaks. Like, what part would break on this tractor and what would that look like? Oh, that's it. I got it. Because I'm never going to be a peanut farmer. I don't know. But so, yeah, you just never know. Anyway.
Yeah, that it's so helpful to think of like that. So how do you, let's flip it. Because whenever I bring this up, what I'll get back is they're stealing my words. Oh. Other people are going to ingest all my books, or they already have ingested all my books. And then people are going to profit off of my labor.
There is no such thing as original art. Like, there is nothing that's not influenced by something else. You know what I mean? Like, that every artist is inspired. That's why one of the biggest questions interviewers ask, what inspired you? Because you're inspired by something. You know, something is going to have influenced you. That's the only way you come up with your own opinions, is because somebody said something. You're like, well, yeah, but also. And so, but not really. So, yeah, it doesn't bother me. You can't not be influenced. And therefore, your work is always going to be somebody else's in some form or fashion, and yours is going to be somebody else's in some form or fashion. So it's
I always think about, it's obviously like so much bigger than this, but I think about when I was like in my early 20s and I laid out literally 1,000 books and deconstructed them, and it took me like 3 years. It was a huge project. It was part of my dissertation.
That's awesome.
It was a content analysis using like social sciences to identify like, what does this part of a book do? What does this part do? I was slower than the robots, but those 1,000 books have influenced all the other books I've ever written.
Mm-hmm.
It was manual, so there's a speed thing. But why do you think people are so, especially like authors, creatives, artists, are so like mad about AI?
I think they don't understand it, for one. They don't understand that it's not going to just copy a book and be like, here's your new book. Like, that's not how it works. They don't understand it. They are also probably a little jealous of the speed, I would think, that people...
Yeah,
like I pick up productivity when I am using AI to help me get things done, and I can do more in less time. It doesn't mean that I am not stressing over the final product no, I'm still stressing over that final product. You know, it gets back from the editor and I'm like, is this good enough? I don't care how many computers looked at it first. Like, is it good enough? I don't know. Like, I hope so, but I'm still going to have that accomplishment too in the end. So I think they don't understand it and they're jealous. Long and the short.
I think that's a part of it. And I think it's like that fear of, which I think is superhuman, of like being replaced. I will tell you, this is probably the best book I've written. I think this is my 8th or 9th book with my name on it. I've done about 50 ghostwritten books. By far my worst selling book. Like, best book I've written. It's selling horribly. It is like, usually this book came out in August, and by now, like we're almost at a year mark, I don't have a single book that's under 1,000 copies. Most of my books by this point have sold 2,000 to 3,000. Mm-hmm. I had a really big hit in 2019, and in the first year I sold like 15,000.
Wow.
Which was like great. So like just to give people a range, like not trying to, I have sold 200 copies of this book. I cannot get booked to speak about it. People get so mad. I get hate mail. Like, so the reviews are great, and I know how well written it is.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's the accessibility factor, if it's the AI factor, but you guys should all go get this book.
Yes.
It's called Equalizing Quill. It's really, really good, but I've made people mad with it. I don't know. The only place where I've had a ton of pickup is in the disability community. And that's where I've mostly been speaking, is at academic conferences on disability.
So do you think people misunderstand the purpose of the book and they're like, well, that's not for me, clearly?
No, they read the title, which maybe I should retitle it, but they read the title and they believe that what I am telling people is go to ChatGPT and say, write me a book about purple irises.
Well, that is unfortunate. We will be changing people's opinions about that book because they're going to listen to this and they're going to realize, oh, I was wrong, and now I need to go buy it for myself and a friend.
Yeah, there we go.
Let's hope so. Well, we're kind of already doing it, but is there anything else you want to flip the script with? And you get to host the show?
I want to talk about series.
Okay.
So you've written books in a series, and I think like one of the things that I get asked about the most when people come to me, they've already got the series. I have an author right now, and the first thing she said when she signed up to work with me was like, I have 3 books. And my instinct is always like, let's see how the first one does. But I'd love to know your take. How should authors think about series? Should they be planning out a whole series before they release the first one? Is it like podcasts, like do 3 before you release anyone? I'd love to hear your thoughts on authors and series, and how important are they now as a strategy for authors to build a following?
Yeah, I do think that series are kind of the way it goes right now. I think especially, and that may be a genre thing, because I write in the new adult contemporary romance. And so having a series in the romance world, because people are so invested in the characters, because a lot of them are character driven, and I think that's where you find a lot of successful series. Because I know that's, for me, my Fall When You're Ready, the one that just came out in February, was only going to be a standalone. It wasn't going to be a series. But then as I started writing, there was another couple in the book that said, hey, but we have a story too. And I was like, oh, I guess I should tell your story. And then after that, it kind of turned into, but I kind of want to know what happened to them, because it's a group of 12 contestants on a reality country music show. And so they are competition. And so they're all there all the time. And so there are different people whose story, they're coming to the same place from different places. And so things like that, a series works. But I do think you kind of have to make them available as standalones as well, like when you write them, because not everybody's going to want
So
to.
when you're crafting a series, do you make sure, like if I just read the second one in the series, it'll make sense?
Yes, like that is, because I hate to pick up a book in a series and be like, wait, who was that? Who was that? I don't understand. And then you have to go back to the beginning. And I like to know that I could just pick up a book and be happy and kind of know some background and foreground. But yeah, I always write it as a standalone, as part of a series. Does that make sense?
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Very interesting. And then do your characters, as you're writing, tell you the direction of this series? Or do you kind of, in a more, I'm thinking of this as executive functioning, like do you, Jennifer, conceive of the series and it's more just like the words and the flow? No.
No, my characters pop up, and that's where Fall When You're Ready came from. Was I was listening to, I love 90s country, like that's my music genre of choice, and I was listening to it, and the song came on, and all of a sudden the 2 characters popped in my head, and they said, hey, this is our song, so now you have to write our story. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. And so they were just like, this is where we started, and this is where we're going to go. And so I had to put all the pieces together in between, and I was like, well, that was fun. And then the next characters, they were like, hey, we have a story too, if you want to know how this happened in the first book. And I was like, oh, I do want to know how that happened. And it just kind of spiraled from there. So I've written 3.5 books of that of that particular series, and then I've got a spin-off that these characters keep like saying, hey, we're around here too, don't forget about us, we're in the background, we'd like to be main characters. So we'll see what happens.
So I think this is what's also so different in some ways, but also people don't realize how similar it is like, I know as fiction writers, you have a relationship with your characters. As a ghostwriter, I create a persona as the writer, which is obviously not, you. I can't be you.
Yeah.
But I have in my head you, my version of you, almost like I'm an actor.
Yeah.
And so when I go to write, I get into character as you, and then I'm having a conversation as I'm writing, as if I'm thinking in my head as you, but I'm like having a conversation with you. And I'll be ghostwriting, and I'll often go in a different direction. This just happened. I was just ghostwriting a book for a lawyer who's amazing, has an incredible family history. She grew up in the church that Martin Luther King Jr. was the minister of.
Okay.
So she was born after he was assassinated, but her grandmother had like led the Selma Bridge march.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they planned it in her grandmother's living room. So it's like incredible stories. And I had this idea. I've been reading all these biographies of her grandmother and watching Selma, but I'm watching them in character as her. And so then like I wrote this whole thing. I had no idea if it was true because I'm writing a memoir and I was literally making things up. And so I'm like, I have to send you this because I just made this up. And she's like, this is 100% correct.
Wow.
And I know it's pattern matching, but I feel psychic.
Yeah.
Like there was dialogue, there was a conversation. It was like, it was like me talking to her grandmother, but like, I'm not a Black lady from Alabama in the, pre-segregation. She was like a teacher in the 50s, and she actually was the head of the National Colored PTA. And when they had to integrate, she like led that movement. And so I'm like imaginating. I just made up a word.
I like it.
Yeah, I'm keeping it. I was writing all this dialogue, but then I was like, this is like a little dicey. Is this my place to write this dialogue? And then when I sent it, she was like, chef's kiss. I was like, okay. So I think there's something that's so different. And I do think that's flow state.
Oh, yeah.
But
it has to be.
When you're writing the dialogue of your characters and it's like plonk, 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 it's so different than when you're just typing whatever they're telling you.
Oh,
like, yeah. I don't know. I'm just the typist in this show.
That's exactly what happens because I'll go back and read it and I was like, oh, that's what he said, because you are just like so separated. It's like you've compartmentalized and you're just like, this is me today over here. Apparently, we'll see.
Right.
Yeah, it's wild.
Fascinating. So fascinating.
Oh my gosh, I love that. Well, I know we're creeping up on an hour, and I mean, I could sit here and talk for another hour, but I've got another conversation that I have to have. It's in the way. No.
This has been such a fun conversation.
It was. So I want you to tell listeners how they can connect with you and your work and where to find your books.
Yep. I got 2 links where you can track me down. I am the co-host and the producer of the Autistic Culture Podcast, which is autisticculturepodcast.com. We talk about lots of autistic authors, like, for instance, Hans Christian Andersen and Emily Dickinson. So if you would like a deep dive on how their autism and their bottom-up processing has affected their work, Arthur Conan Doyle, we talk about in our Shakespeare episode, tons of literary and creative stuff there. And then if you want to participate in some of my free coaching or get my books or find out about working with me, that's over at differencepress.com. And that's where you can find all my books and the books I've worked on.
Perfect. And that'll be in the show notes. So all they have to do is find the show notes and click a link. All right. I have one last big question. It's the final question. It's going to change the world. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Let's do it. What is one piece of advice or encouragement you want someone to walk away with if they hear nothing else?
If you don't love it, it's not going to work anyway. It doesn't matter what anyone tells you. If they're like, this is the best advice ever given to any author, you must do TikTok. Colleen Hoover was successful. Like, the only way to be successful, it will not work for you if you don't love it. You can't make yourself love it. And if you love something super weird, if you're like, one of the places we get our most podcast listeners from is our TeePublic store. Our shirts have gone viral. People love our t-shirts. Every time we do a show, we have a t-shirt. Like, we have a Hans Christian Andersen was framed t-shirt because Charles Dickens made him look like a total jerk. And you can hear that whole sordid story. He was like hooking up with a 19-year-old girl, cheating on his wife, and then basically tried to blame everything on Hans Christian Andersen. It's a very classic double empathy problem. Hans Christian Andersen's autistic. Charles Dickens is very, very neurotypical. So we have these shirts. They've gone totally viral. Each shirt, we list what podcast it's related to. And this is where we get the bulk of our subscribers. No one is teaching that. You cannot join a mastermind. You can't buy a prompt pack. That is not a thing. And consistently, the things that have been the most successful in my life are like what no one is teaching. Once someone teaches it, I feel like it often stops working. Mm-hmm. It's what authentically comes out of you. So if you feel at all like you have to do it, your publisher says you have to do it, it's not going to work anyway. Don't worry about it. Take it out.
I mean, yes, that's 100%. Because I know that if I don't love something, I am not going to put my best work into it because it's a waste of my time and energy. Like, it is. And so, yeah, that is
time much better spent napping or baking or whatever it is that lights you up.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Angela, thank you so much for being here and having this conversation. Like, I'm fired up. I'm ready. Let's do, I don't know what. Let's do something.
Okay. I know. It's been so great hanging out with you. I'm really excited. Thank you for inviting me to be on your show.